So, good evening, everyone. And this is our weekly Soul of the Parasha class. And we're going to talk about Parashat Shlach, which is really the parasha here in Eretz Israel. We're 1 week ahead of you guys, everyone who's outside of Eretz Israel in Chutz La'aretz. You're only going to read Shlach next week, but it's always good to prepare. So what we're going to talk about today is we're going to talk about the connection between the Parsha and the Haftarah. As we all know, there's always a very deep thematic connection between the story that's going on in the Parasha and whatever it is that's talked about or mentioned in the Haftarah. So here, sometimes the connection is very clear, sometimes it's not so clear. In our case, it's very clear, and it's very, very meaningful. And in fact, we can almost say that the story of the Parasha is incomplete without the story of the Haftarah to complement it and almost round it, give it like a happy ending. And so what are the stories? The story of the Parasha is the story of the 12 spies, the 12 Meraglim that Moshe sent to Eretz Israel in order to see what the country was like, and if it can be conquered and in what way, and what the state of the cities and the camps are, and so on. And of course, it ended up being a very, very negative story. It was a terrible sin, one of the worst sins of the 40 years of the desert. And in fact, it was the reason we spent 40 years in the desert. The 12 spies, 10 out of the 12 spies spoke very badly of the Holy Land. And they said it was inconquerable. And they talked about it as a land that eats its own dwellers. And there's a land that's full of giants, that's inconquerable. And the whole journey from Mitzrayim to Eretz Israel was a big waste of time. There's no chance we're going to conquer the land. We might as well stay in the desert or go back to Egypt. And because of this sin, and because of the fact that the majority of the Jewish people believed them and listened, and that's called Kabbalat Lashon Hara. It's also a sin to believe Lashon Hara, to hear it. This was the reason we were punished with staying in the desert for 40 years, corresponding to the 40 days of the spying time, the touring time, that those 12 spies spent in Eretz Israel. And that's why the whole generation coming out of Egypt died in the desert, except a few individuals. And a new generation had to be born during those 40 years, and that's the generation that inherited the land. So this parsha tells us a very, very negative, a very bad example of spies, of people who go and try and figure out what a certain place is all about. And it's very much reminiscent of the verse, "Lo taturu acharei levavchem ve'achrei einechem asher atem zonim acharem." Don't follow in a wrong way your eyes and your heart, which really talks about a kind of external looking, an external gaze at things, and also an external pull of the heart. And that's very negative. However, in the Haftarah, we have an extremely, a sort of counter story, which talks about another espionage, another spying story, and that's the story of the Haftarah, where 1 generation later, it's not Moshe sending the spies, it's Yehoshua, his pupil, his follower, the one who's meant to lead the Jewish people into the land, and not just take them out of Egypt and give them the Torah. And this time it's not 12 spies, it's 2 spies, the same number of the spies that were okay in the first time, right? Where the 12 spies, 10 of which sinned, 2 of which spoke properly. And again, we have 2 spies, which is the same number. And according to Chazal, to the sages, one of them is actually the very same person. It's Kalev ben Yefuneh, and the other one is Pinchas. So we have 2 spies, and the spies, this time it's a very different story altogether. It's not 40 days, it's just 1 day. They're not going throughout the country. They're going to 1 city, and then to 1 house, and then they only speak with 1 person, and they spend 1 night. But this is an extremely positive story, and it ends with the successful conquest or the beginning of the conquest, entering the land of Israel and conquering Jericho, and also the conversion of the person they speak to, which is, of course, Rachav, the prostitute. And in a very deep way, why are these stories complementary? Because what happened with the first story was that the spies came, and as we say, they spoke badly or wrongfully about the land. They said lashon hara about the land. However, the second story, although they're not traveling all across the land, they're just going to Jericho and to the house of Rachav and meeting Rachav. Rachav herself is in a very deep way and a sort of embodiment, or she sort of represents the entire land. Because the entire spying story is just her, and the purpose of the spying story is to see whether the land is conquerable or not. And they see this by meeting this woman, Rachav. Rachav is in a way an embodiment, a kind of human, the land of Israel taking on a human form. And the fact that she says, we admire you, we're afraid of you, we don't want the rule of the 7 nations anymore, we believe in you more than we believe in the 7 peoples currently ruling us. It's like the land herself saying, I don't want the 7 peoples ruling over me anymore, I want you ruling me. And it's almost like there's a prophecy that says that if we will misbehave and if we'll be idol worshippers in the land of Israel, then the land will, so to speak, vomit us up, as it did the previous nations. So in a way, Rachav, cooperating with the Jewish spies and betraying, in a way, her own people, this is like the land vomiting out the 7 peoples. And this is like the land itself, which is now speaking for itself. So the first story was that nobody listened to the land. They spoke badly, wrongfully about the land. The 10 spies came and saw whatever they wanted to see, and they didn't see what they didn't want to see. And they saw it as a land of giants, and as a land that's inconquerable, and so on. But that was all just their own imagination, their own fears, and maybe fantasies that they projected upon the land. They didn't listen to the land itself. They didn't see the land itself. And the 2 spies that were good, they said, no, don't listen to them. Tova haaretz me'od me'od. The land is very, very good. They were the only ones who did see the land for what it was. But here in the second story, we have the land, so to speak, speaking for itself via the mouth of Rachav, who is this very kind of earthly mother figure. It's like in ancient times, right? The land, generally, the whole earth was considered like mother nature, like one big mother. And we had this fertility gods that they were very feminine, they were very round, and they were really the human personification. That's the word I was looking for before. The personification of the earth. Rachav is like the personification of the land, and she's this very earthly figure, let's say, and she's saying, I want to have this connection with you, with the Jewish people. So these 2 stories, and they really go together. The first story ends very, very badly, ends with the 40-year exile in the wilderness, and the second story ends the 40 years in the wilderness and leads us into the land of Israel. And it's, instead of not listening to the land, it's the land speaking for itself. Now, looking at the first story, we always call them the 12 meraglim. That's always how they're called, the 12 spies, meraglim, chet meraglim, the sin of the spies. However, very interestingly, the word meraglim is not mentioned even once in the whole story. They're never called meraglim. The only verb that's used is latur, not leragel, to spy, but latur, which is really has the same meaning as the English word tour. The English word tour comes from the Hebrew word latur, and tourist, right? It's really a Hebrew word. And that's the only word, it's repeated many times in the story, that is used regarding the 12 spies of the Parsha, not the Haftarah. The 12 spies of the Parsha are only called Tayarim, and all they're doing is Latur. And it's very clear that this verb and this word, Latur Tayar, has now, because of this, a very negative connotation. And as I said before, it's immediately associated with the commandment, lo latur, do not follow your eyes and your heart, of course in a negative way, lo liznot. It's amazing that the second positive spy story talks about a zona, a prostitute, who then converts. She becomes a very holy soul, and she marries Yoshua, according to the Midrashim. She becomes the wife of Yoshua and the mother of many important prophets. But the negative one, the negative story, also has to do with prostitution, not in any overt, it's not explicit, but if we connect the word latur with the commandment, lo taturu acharei levavchem v'chenechem asher atem zonim acharem, that you go and you prostitute, or you go in this negative kind of way after your eyes and your heart, it's very clear that the first story is a very external kind of look. So latur, touring, that's the word. It's the only words used regarding the 12 spies in the parsha. But we have two more words that appear regarding the two good spies in the Haftarah. It's Joshua chapter 2. The two words that are used is meragel. Now the word does appear. They are called meraglim, the two good spies. And they're also called, another verb that's used is lachpor, to dig. So really we have three words now. One that's negative, and it's associated with the negative story of the parsha, which is tar. And then we have two more words that are associated with the two good spies, which is meragel and chofer, spy and digger. It's tourist, spy, digger, right? That's the three words. Now the Malbim, right? Of Mikraot Gdolot, explain the difference between the three kinds of spying. So he said, the tourist, as we see, is only looking at the outside. He's looking for objective, measurable information, and was all, by the way, the mission of the first 12 spies, just to see how many soldiers and what are the camps and whether the cities have walls or they don't have walls and all this. That's what they were supposed to do. Part of what their sin was that they also gave their opinion, that it was inconquerable and it's full of giants and so on. But it could be a good thing to latur. If you're just touring and you're not presuming to look on the inside, that could be okay, but that's not what they did. So latur is just to look at the outside, the surface of things. It could be used negatively. If you think the surface is everything, that was their sin. But if you realize the surface isn't everything, it's just the surface, that's okay. So latur is to see the surface. What is leragel? Second term that we have. Leragel, says the Malbim, is to try and find the spot through which the country can be conquered, which we can see as meaning the point of transition between the outside and the inside, right? Because a tourist is looking at the outside, he's, so to speak, he's standing on the outside and is looking on the external surface. The spy wants to find a way in. He's trying to find the entryway, the gate, the place that's the soft spot, or the place where the land opens up and you can enter it, right? That's the purpose of the spy. This is why the two positive, the Yoshua's spies, they were meraglim, spies, because that was the whole point. It's not just trying to gather intelligence. That was the 12 Moshe's spies mission. The Yoshua's spies mission is now we want to conquer. So we want to find the place to conquer, and that place is Jericho. So latur is to see the surface. Leragel is to find the entryway. What is chofer? So as chofer means to dig, right? Digger. Chofer is trying to go into the depth. And this is the word the Malbim uses. Just like a digger, when you dig, you're going deeper and deeper and deeper. You're trying to dig to know what people are thinking and their machinations and their mood, the mood of the land. It's a totally different. It's the very opposite of the first touring kind of spying. The digging kind of spying is you're going undercover, as they did, and you're trying to assimilate maybe among the people, and try and hear the conversations and get the mood and see if what the morale is and what people are thinking. And the Malbim says, machshavot anashim, the thoughts of people, vesitrehem, and their hidden things, or what's hidden about them. Everything that's hidden about the land, that's the purpose of the chofer. So if you listen to we spoke about that in our call in Chassidut, world, soul, and godliness. So in a way, it also very much corresponds to what we have here. Latur, to be a tourist, is the world, the external appearance of everything. Leragel, to find the entryway, that's more like neshamot, to try and find the soul, something that's more in the inside, and that pulls me inside. And then finally, the chofer, the digger, is trying to find the deepest level, which is like the level of godliness, which is whether really trying to figure out what the mood of the land is and if it's conquerable and how everything is really on the inside, is really trying to ask the question, is it Hashem's will that we now conquer the land or not? That's really what they're listening to. It's not just listening. It could seem that the chofer is looking for the souls, but really what he's looking for is not just the souls. The meragel is already looking for the souls, but the chofer is trying to see on a deep way if it's et ratzon, if it's a time of ratzon, of will, if the land is really conquerable, it's listening to the deepest aspect of reality. So what we have now here is, now we see that the first negative story, Moshe's 12 spies were just tourists. That was their mission. But their sin was that they thought it was more than that, and they also volunteered their very negative opinions. But the two positive spies that Yoshua sent, they were also meraglim and chofrim. Okay, so now following on this, we can now add another sort of dimension to all of this. And I'm saying dimension because we can now see a beautiful idea that really leads us into the depth of everything that's going on here, which is, as we know, space has 3 dimensions. And the 3 dimensions of space, we call them breadth, length, and depth, right? In a way, we can say that touring has to do just with breadth, although you could say that seeing the surface is like 2 dimensions. But what I want to suggest now is that even those 2 dimensions it's still one-dimensional thinking. It's only breadth, and I'll try and prove this in a minute. So the touring is just the breadth, rochav in Hebrew. Leragel is also to go to the length, which is in a way deeper than just the breadth, right? Because if you, in 2-dimensional thinking, if you're drawing a horizontal line, that's the breadth, it's more superficial than if you're there's something about the vertical line which suggests depth, even if it isn't depth, because we're still in 2 dimensions. But there's something about breadth which is more superficial, and there's something about length which suggests, because it can go up on the page, it suggests going somehow higher or deeper. It suggests depth. So the tourists only go for the breadth, and the meraglim, the second kind of spying, goes for the length, and the chofrim, which dig into the land, they go for the depth. So in a way, we're taking these 3 kinds of dimensions, and we're really saying breadth thinking is the most coarse, materialistic way of looking at things. Length thinking is looking for the spiritual, deeper element of things, right? The entryway. And depth thinking is the deepest one. It's trying to find the godly, the divine spark, the aspect, right? The presence of God in everything, right? You can be a materialist, and then you can go beyond it and try and add the dimension of spirituality, and that's far better than being a materialist. But however, it's still flat in comparison to try and not just not go beyond physicality and spirituality and find godliness, find the godly presence, Hashem's voice, Hashem's presence, right, in everything. So now there are two amazing hints or allusions to what I just suggested, which show us that it could, that in a way the 12 the wrongs, the bad story, the Moshe's spies in the parsha, it was only just breadth. So two hints. One hint is that the verse says, "Vaya'alu vayaturu et haaretz." They came up and they toured the land, right? The verb that appears again and again. Mimidbar Tzin, from the desert of Tzin, ad Rechov. Rechov is a place. Today in Hebrew it means street, but Rechov is also Rochav, breadth. And then they get to Hamat. Now the Rashi explains that what they really did was they went in a kind of, he calls it a gamma. He takes the Greek letter, the third letter gamma, which really looks like this. It's two lines. But he's saying what they did was they went from the southeastern corner of the land all the way to the west, across the southern border. And then they reached this place called Rechov. And then they went all the way north, across the coastline on the western side of the country, all the way to the northeastern point, right? So they went from northwestern point. They went from southeast to southwest, and then to the northwest. So they did these two lines. That's like breadth and length, right? But the name that appears is at the corner is called Rechov, which suggests davka, breadth and not length, but that's just one piece of evidence. But the stronger piece of evidence is that Rashi explains that it should have taken them 80 days, because it takes 40 days to make each of these tours. The breadth tour takes 40 days, and then the length tour also takes 40 days. But it took them altogether it took them 40 days, not 80 days. So how can this be explained? It says it was 400 leagues each way, and you do 10 leagues a day. So it was 40 days and 40 more days. It should have been 80 days. Why? How come it was only 40 days? So he says, again, it's quoting the sages, that Hashem knew that they're going to be punished. And he knew that he wanted to make it a year for each day, but he didn't want them to spend 80 years in the desert. So he felt sorry for them. So he made the journey, he skipped, and he made an 80-day journey somehow condensed into 40 days. And then he made it, and then they made the whole thing in just 40 days. Now, it doesn't say how this was. Maybe they went through the entire thing twice as fast, and maybe they skipped one and they went through the other, or they went through one and skipped through the other. But the fact that they have the place of the name Rechov at the corner, at the center of this journey, suggests that in a way they only saw. How can you do 2 dimensions in half the time? You must have done only 1 dimension, right? It's one way of trying to figure this out, and it goes beautifully with the rest of everything. That we have Tayarim, Meraglim, and Chofrim, which are 3 levels, and they only did the first level, that was the Malbim, because they're only called tourists. They're not called Meraglim, and they're not called Chofrim. And it goes beautifully with the idea that they only did 1 dimension, not 2. So Rashi says they went le'orka le'rochba. Rashi says this. They went through the length and the breadth, but they did it in half the time because Hashem, he gave them kfitzat haderech, the shortening of the way, the jumping of the way. So really what they did was they only went through one dimension out of the 2, and we can assume it was the breadth, because the name Rechov appears there. So this is very interesting. Now, because we have now the second story, and the second story talks about spies who were meraglim and chofrim, and they weren't just tourists. They didn't see just the breadth. They saw also the length and the depth. And now we can say that they added those two missing dimensions. And of course, some of you, I'm sure, have guessed this by now. The name Rehov and the dimension Rochav also refer, of course, to Rachav. Rachav the prostitute. Rachav the prostitute, her name means, you can put the nikudim in all kinds of places, but at the end of the day, you have the three letters. And the three letters can be read as Rachav, can be read as Rehov, that place in the first story, amazing link between the two stories, and can be read also Rochav, breadth. And in a way, we can say the following. We can say that Rachav appeared to be, on the outside, like every prostitute appears to be, only breadth, only physicality. And again, Rachav is the personification of the land of Israel. The land of Israel, in the eyes of the sinning spies, was just Rochav. They just saw the breadth. They just saw the outside, the physicality of it. And that's how they made her into a prostitute. By saying this land is inconquerable, it's giant, and they sort of simultaneously made it something very, very big, but also something that doesn't belong to us in any way. They turned it into something so physical, they didn't see the spiritual aspects of it. And they made it into a prostitute. And now we have an amazing midrash that says that the whole story in Joshua chapter 2, with the two spies meeting Rachav. How old was Rachav? So the midrash says Rachav was 50 years old. Now, 50 years old means that when the people of Israel left Egypt 40 years prior, she was 10 years old. And then the same midrash says the following amazing fact. The midrash says that Rachav became a prostitute when she was 10. As the Jewish people started their journey, their 40-year journey, she was 10 years old, and she deteriorated to the state of prostitution at that age. She was a prostitute for 40 years, the same time that the Jewish people spent in the land of Israel. And as she became 50, she started of her own accord doing tshuva. She didn't want to be a prostitute anymore. She didn't want to be ruled by the 7 Canaanite nations who treated her as a prostitute. And of course, again, she embodies and personifies and symbolizes the land. It's the land that's being abused by the 7 peoples. And she's rebelling, and she's saying, I'm not just breadth. I'm not just Rachav. You're all treating me as breadth, and you're treating me just as I'm just physical for you, but I'm not just physical. And again, this also connects to another amazing midrash. There's a midrash that says that in some mysterious way, Rachav used her name as a prostitute. It says in Hebrew, Rachav zinta bishma. She was a prostitute using her name in some way. So the explanation given in Chazal is that the memory of her was so powerful, and it was somehow associated with her name, that if someone who saw her would utter her name twice, and he would say Rachav, Rachav, he would immediately sin, because it would evoke the memory of her. It would awaken his sexual desire, and he would immediately sin in spilling his seed in vain, just by saying her name. So it's a very strange idea that just uttering the name evokes her memory. But we can try and give another explanation for Rachav zinta bishma. She was a prostitute using her name. Maybe we can say that her name, in a way, made her, it turned her into a prostitute, or it brought out only the external, objective, physical, sexual aspect of her. Because if you're called Rachav, if you're called breadth, then people see you as only having breadth, as only a body. You don't have length, which is going your inner world, And definitely you don't have depth, which is a divine spark, because you're only breadth. So her name, in a way, prostituted her, or turned her into a prostitute, or stressed this aspect of her, which is only one aspect of her. Right? We're all three-dimensional in the sense that we have a body and we have a soul and we have a divine spark also, a divine nature. So we have this amazing sort of mirror imaging. We have, as the Jewish people were sinning in listening to the 10 sinful spies, at roughly the same time, Rachav was becoming a prostitute. So it's corresponding, right? Because it's lo taturu achre levavchem v'chenechem asher atem zonim acharim. It's like following, becoming a prostitute, letting your eyes lead you into a kind of prostitution. That's what the spies did. And she is actually going into prostitution. And then we need 40 years of tshuva. The Jewish people have to do tshuva for listening to the spies. And Rachav needs those 40 years, which again, it's the land becoming prepared again to do tshuva. And then when those 40 years end, and we have a new generation of Jews, and we have Rachav who reached the age of 50, it says, Ben chamishim le'eitzad, you're getting new, deep advice. When you reach the age of 50, you're able to see deeper. And then she's doing tshuva, and is saying, I don't want to be prostitute anymore, and I'm also not willing to have other people see me this way. And I'm not willing to only be called Rachav. I want me to see, and I want other people to see that I also have length and depth. I have a soul, and I have a divine nature. Now, it's not over yet. Out of the two, right? The first story is a negative story. It's just the breadth dimension, just the outside, just the touring, just the surface. The second story has two things, right? It's two verbs. It's leragel and lachfor, to spy and to dig. And we need to see those two elements somehow happening one after the other. And we can actually see this in an amazing way. The fact that Rachav herself is beginning to do tshuva, that's like Rachav discovering the length dimension within her. At the age of 50, maybe it's like a bit like the 50th gate of understanding, right? There are 49 gates of regular kind of understanding, and then there's the 50th gate, and it's ben chamishim le'etza, acquiring this kind of deep sense of a deep advice. And so once she has this, her soul awakens in a way. And then she realized that I have not just breadth, I also have length. And that's why she's able to hide the two spies and to tell them, I'm on your side, and I want to help you, and I want to help you, the Jewish people, conquer this land. I like the fact that you're such a holy people, that you have all those laws against sexual abuse and misusing the sexual urge. And you're very holy people, and I know that you're going to treat me more respectfully than the 7 Canaanite peoples are treating me. They only see me as a prostitute. It is said that all the greatest officers and people of importance would all visit at some point or another Rachav. They all knew her, but they knew her, of course, only as something totally physical. But she recognized that the Jewish people are spiritual, and they bring with them a spiritual outlook. And it echoes the spirituality she discovers within her. So the length dimension, which is her own internality, the inward aspect of herself, is awakening of her own accord. She doesn't need them. The moment they come, she says, come here, I'm going to help you. She hides them in the attic and tells them, I'm helping you, and now you also help me. There's a cooperation here. So she acknowledges the length dimension herself. However, she does not yet acknowledge of her own on herself the depth dimension. So she realizes that she is not just a body, she's not just a prostitute, she has a soul, but she doesn't believe she can actually do a full tshuva and convert and be reborn, because the essence of her soul is still hidden from her. And we can see this, and again, in another beautiful midrash. The midrash says, one of the verses, one of the things that Rachav says to the two spies is a verse that we know from the Torah. She says, Hashemu Elokim, bashamayim mima'al, v'al ha'aretz mitachat. Hashem is God. From the Torah says Hashem hu ha'elokim. It's really two differences. In the original verse, it says Hashem is the God, whereas Rachav is only saying Hashem God. Still a little bit of idol worship left in her. But the second difference is more important. The original verse said Bashamayim mimal, in the heavens above, v'al ha'aretz mitachat, and in the earth below, ein od, there is no other. Right? That's the verse from the Torah. Hashem Elokim, bashamayim mimal, v'al ha'aretz mitachat, in the heavens above and the earth below, ein od, there is no other. There's no other God at all. She doesn't say those two words. She says Hashem Elokim, Hashem is God. He's a true God. I believe he's God. He's not the only God, but he's a God. At least I believe he's not false. I believe it's very true. Your God, the Jewish people's God. And I also believe he's both in the heavens and in the earth. He has both physicality and spirituality. That's what she's also discovering about herself. However, she doesn't say the words, there is no other. And so the simplest understanding is that she still believes in some more, in other gods. But Chazal say it's not just that. Maybe she even believed he was the only God. But she didn't believe that Hashem was present in the empty space, Chalalo shel olam, later on called in Kabbalah Chalal HaPanui, the empty space that's under the heavens and the earth. So there's a space, there's like a void at the bottom of creation. And she feels Hashem is in the heavens, Hashem is in spirituality, Hashem is in the earth, Hashem is in physicality, but Hashem is not in the depth of the vacant space, and he can't get there. And in a way we can say, I'm sunk. Depth can be something very good. It can also be something very bad, like to sink to the depth of something, right? And she feels that she has sunk to such a depth, 40 years of prostitution. She has sunk to such a depth, she cannot do tshuva. She cannot return to such a degree to be purified and to convert. It's impossible. Hashem can't reach me. The things I did, the depth I've gone to, in a negative sense of depth, there's no corresponding spiritual depth, right? The age of 50 is the 50th gate of understanding, of purity. It could also be the 50th gate of impurity. And in a way, she reached the 50th gate of impurity. We, as a Jewish people, were saved from the 50th gate of impurity in Egypt. We got close, but we were saved. But she came down to the 50th gate of impurity. And she believes it's beyond repair. It's beyond tikkun. And so she believes that she has length, spirituality, but she doesn't believe that the negative kind of depth that she has sunk to can be rectified by a positive kind of spiritual, godly depth, that she has a divine spark with which she can do a true and whole tshuva and be reborn, and to reach the essence of her soul, the depth of her being in a positive way. She doesn't believe that. How is she made to believe that not only is she not just breadth, not only does she have length, but she also has depth, because of the two spies who are not just meraglim. She helped them be meraglim. They did this together. That's the length I mentioned. But they're also chofrim. They're diggers. And they dug deep into her, and they saw beyond her name that makes her into a prostitute. She saw she's not just Rachav. She's a very inner soul, but she's not just an inner soul. She's a deep soul. she also has a divine spark. And they did this by giving her the crimson cord or the scarlet cord. Tikvat chut hashani. This is a beautiful Hebrew term. The scarlet cord isn't just cord. There's two words for cord used in this term. It's not just chut hashani, it's tikvat chut hashani. Tikva comes from the word kav, which is line. That's like a cord. They give her the scarlet cord that she can hang outside her window, with which they're going to save her and her family. But in a deeper way, the scarlet cord signifies, tikva also means hope. They give her hope that she can be redeemed, that although she has sunk to such depth and she reached the 50th gate of impurity, and she's a prostitute for 40 years, and whatever she did, tshuva precedes the world. And the tshuva exists also in the empty space. The empty space isn't empty. Hashem is everywhere truly. Ein od. There is no empty space. There's no other place or space or level of sinning that's beyond connecting to God from that place, from that point. And so she tells them, I believe in your God, but I'm beyond saving. And they tell her, thank you so much, and we're going to let you know that you're not just breadth and length, you're also depth, and we're giving you this crimson cord, which is also the crimson hope. The hope, like she feels that she's in this deep pit, and they're descending this rope to save her. And they're giving her the rope of hope. In English, this is beautiful, that in Hebrew it's tikva and chut, right? But in English it rhymes. It's the rope of hope. They're giving her the rope of hope, and they're letting her know, they're revealing to her that she also has a depth dimension to her, the level of the essence of the soul that's always pure, regardless of how much she sinned and how much she became what she became. There's this pure divine spark. And when they give her this rope of hope, this tikvat chut hashani, and she holds on to it, and she climbs out of her pit. She climbs out of the empty space. She converts, and she becomes the wife of Yoshua, and the mother of the greatest prophets. Jeremiah and other prophets are all descendants of Rachav. Just one final idea, just to round this all up. So we moved from Rochav, breadth, to Orech, length, to Omek, depth. And that corresponds to the 3 levels of spying. But we have to redeem the 10 sinning spies as well. And it could sound that breadth is negative, that breadth is not a good thing, that physicality is not a good thing. But that's not true, of course, as we all know. Hashem Bashamayim al v'la'aretz mitachat is also in the physical realm. So how is the breadth redeemed? That it's okay to be beautiful, it's okay to be physical, it's okay to have all this element to you. We don't want to abandon breadth to just have length and depth. That appears in the fact that when Yoshua added his bit to the Birkat Hamazon, to the benching of the food, he added the term Eretz Chemda Tova Urechava, a precious good and spacious, or a land of breadth. And it's widely interpreted that he wanted to mention his wife. He wanted to mention Rachav. So he put it into the benching by referring to the land. As we said, Rachav is the personification of the land. He called the land precious, good, and spacious. Chemda Tova Urechava. So by putting this word, her name, the original name, it's really like a sweetening, a hamtaka of the first dimension that was abused by the 10 sinful spies, but the two good spies are able to redeem so much that not only does she discover her soul, not only does she convert and connect to her divine soul, divine aspect of her, but she's also be able to still be called Rachav, and it becomes from a negative name to a very positive name. So we should all be inspired by this, that everything we look at regarding other people, we see other people, we just see the outside of them, we see the breadth element of them. We have to look deeper. We have to be not just tourists of the world and of other people. We have to be also spies and of looking for the place where the inner dimension is we can see it from there. And then we also have to go even deeper and be diggers and try and find the divine spark of every soul that we meet. And that, as we see in this story, includes also non-Jews who have a divine spark, which is their potential to convert. So we should all try and look at everyone using these three dimensions, and then we'll be able to fully inherit the land of Israel.